Welcome to Valley, a world filled to the brim with creatures, big and small, all working together as they share in the prosperity and safety of their communities. The largest settlement in Valley is Three Tree City, a massive dwelling at the conjunction of the forests and the Long River, built across three ancient intertwined trees. It's home to a variety of animal folk and designed to accommodate their different sizes and shapes, whether these creatures are most comfortable in water, or land, or in the sky. Three Tree City has a place for them to call home. The upper branches of Three Tree City are filled with a dazzling array of bird folk, capable of great deeds of chivalry and selflessness. The bird folk are known for their inability to ignore injustice. Perhaps nothing demonstrates the character of the bird folk quite like the Plume Creed, a risky venture to the tip of the world, a mighty peak that no one but a brave bird folk can reach. You can recognize a bird folk who has completed the Plume Creed by the single feather they wear atop their head. Included in this set are several booster fun treatments to collect, one being the borderless raised foil anime cards. Dazzling raised gold foiling and exciting anime art make these cards the apex of collectability. Find English versions globally in collector boosters, and Japanese versions exclusively in Japanese collector boosters. The charming new showcase woodland frame treatment reads Kindred faction cards in frames of foliage, evoking a sense of pastoral beauty and natural elegance. They encapsulate the cozy energy of Bloomburrow and allow players to showcase their fondness for these kindred animals and express their own unique personalities. The closest natural allies of the bird folk are the mouse folk, plucky, loyal seekers of adventure and glory. Mouse folk have large interconnected families. There are few problems mouse folk can't overcome together. All the animal folk of Valley cherish their young, and springtime is particularly rich with new life. The new mechanic, Offspring, enables you to create 1/1 creature tokens that represent the young version of an animal species. The offspring of your animal folk will have the same abilities as the parent creature. The only difference is their 1/1 power and toughness. They are still children after all. These young creatures of Valley show promise and are eager to take on the adventures that lie ahead. Rabbit folk are also community-focused, as well as being talented chefs and farmers who provide food to most of the creatures in Valley. They're conflict-averse as a rule, preferring to let trouble blow over them rather than stick their noses in it. That doesn't mean that they can't defend themselves, though. Phineas is one such guardian of the animal folk in Valley. This adeptly trained archer stands ready to protect his home from afar, as well as his companions as they venture through Valley. Gathering together is a surefire path to strength. Bloomburrow encourages your creatures to band together so they can gain extra benefits. These kindred animal folk must share with each other in order to survive. The new mechanic, Gift, allows you to gift your opponent a benefit to reap more value out of a spell or artifact. The gift varies depending on the card. It might be food tokens, an extra card, a 1/1 fish, or something else. Through their natural durability, the strength of their kindred bonds, and the willingness to share, the animal folk of Valley can survive almost anything. There are those in Valley that prefer moonlight to sunlight. Bat folk are deeply protective of their community, occasionally superstitious, and focused on maintaining the balance between all things, light and darkness, life and death, and of course, day and night. Nocturnal creatures, they use the moon and stars to determine their choices and fuel their magic. As a result of being awake when others are asleep, they serve as silent guardians of the vulnerable creatures of Valley. Raccoon folk are free-spirited wanderers, collectors, and entertainers. Moira, trash tactician, wields new mechanic, Expend, rewarding you for spending 4 or more mana in a single turn. This fearsome raccoon also likes to work closely with fellow raccoon folk, adding red or green mana for each raccoon you control. Rather than settling down in Three Tree City or elsewhere, raccoons spend their lives on the move, acquiring a hoard of objects along the way. Some may call it trash, but to a raccoon, every broken teapot and piece of wagon wheel is a treasure. There are even more creatures who thrive in odd and adverse circumstances in Three Tree City. The lizard folk are a culture of expressive artists. They value creation and destruction in equal measure. Lizards also have a spiritual attachment to fire. As cold-blooded creatures, they rely on the heat from flame when sunbathing is not an option. Lizard communities can often be found bundled together around a fire or furnace, sharing this sacred connection. The squirrel folk are morbid stewards of land and the life-death cycle. Though they focus mostly on burying the remains of the dead, a select few squirrel folk are able to bring bones back from the grave for their own purposes. The squirrel folk have also become expert at maintaining themselves through caches of food, collected through the art of foraging. The new mechanic, Forage, is a squirrel-themed mechanic that allows you to exile 3 cards from your graveyard or sacrifice a food token to gain an effect. Rat folk are isolationist keepers of secrets and ancient relics. They have survived harsh circumstances by forming psychic connections with native insects. With their insect companion by their side, rat folk can be quite formidable in a pinch. Down by the waterways of Three Tree City, entirely different groups make their home. The otter folk are playful and fun-loving, with a strong daredevil streak. They seek thrills by storm chasing, the practice of following menacing creatures called calamity beasts as closely as possible, until the danger becomes too great even for these adventurous critters. The frog folk are curious and intelligent. They possess a unique culture of augury, which allows them a limited understanding of the future. While their foresight makes them an instrumental part of life in Valley, it also results in many frogs being fatalistic. It's hard to smile when you can always see the waiting doom. Sometimes the frog folk, acting on their own foresight, can bring doom upon themselves. The wizard Glab, for instance, has recently stolen an egg from the great night owl, inviting retaliatory wrath from the powerfully winged creature of darkness. This legendary elemental bird carries night on its wings that blackens the sky. Maha is just one of the many dangers across Valley. These animal folk must coexist with calamity beasts, mighty creatures which blur the line between flesh and blood animals and elemental forces of nature. And for naturalists, the borderless field notes treatment captures the raw power of calamity beasts, rendered in the wild by a loving hand. But the people of Three Tree City are not helpless. The great hero Mabel forms a party of adventurers to protect Valley against the calamity beasts, aided by the now transformed Ral Zarek, who is more than happy to lend a paw. Since there are no humans to be found on Bloomburrow, Ral has magically transformed into an otter upon arriving on this plane. How interesting! But even without help from allies outside of Valley, the animal folk are capable of using magic to defend themselves. A cycle of modal spells allows you to select from a list of 3 abilities. In this set, they're each valued at 1, 2, or 3 paws. Choose up to 5 paws worth to gain those effects. You may even choose the same mode more than once. The card type class is returning with a focus on bakers, blacksmiths, artists, and other villagers. Pay the mana cost at each level to gain its ability, working your way down to all 3. Life goes on in Valley. The turning of the seasons, the tilling of the earth, and the occasional upheaval are all aspects of the everyday to these brave critters. It is not the mighty warriors that make Three Tree City what it is, but the little folk who carry on day after day. There are also heroes and commanders in Valley who are truly adept at inspiring the animals around them. Led by Bello, Bard of the Brambles, the animated army deck lets you ramp into impressive calamity beasts, cast expensive permanents to synergize with the main set's expend mechanic. With Commander Zinnia, Valley's voice, the Family Matters deck specializes in doubling up on enters the battlefield effects by granting your creatures offspring. Fill the board with 1/1 token versions of your creatures. Hazel of the Root Bloom leads the Squirreled Away deck. Outvalue your foes with a combination of squirrel and food tokens. This deck includes some traditional kindred effects for squirrel fans. With the Peace Offering deck, Ms. Bumbleflower hands out cards using the gift mechanic. This deck evokes a group hug style of play that's friendly, until it isn't. In addition to the main set's Imagine Courageous Critters cards, Tameo is one of 4 that can be found in the Commander decks. Because Bloomburrow has its own unique aesthetic, planeswalkers and creatures who happen to end up here, like Ral, are transformed into denizens of Valley. With the Imagine Courageous Critters treatment, your favorite planeswalkers and creatures have been utterly transformed by the adorable lens of Bloomburrow, which brings out their inner animal folk. See powerful creatures and favorite planeswalkers as squirrels, birds, bats, otters, and more. Like this sly planeswalker, if he were to appear here in the land of animal folk. And characters aren't the only ones to get a reimagining. Powerful weapons also take on new forms in the Bloomburrow setting. The Sword of Fire and Ice looks a little different when wielded by an otter. If you'd like to visit Three Tree City and all the creatures of Valley, you'll have your chance soon. You can play early at your local game store for pre-release starting the weekend of July the 26th, and on MTG Arena on July the 30th. Otherwise, we'll see you on August the 2nd when Bloomburrow will be available everywhere. Keep an eye out for the Buy a Box promo and bundle promo cards. Learn more about the adventures of Mabel and her party with story episodes now online at magic.wizards.com. Until then, we hope you'll come visit us soon in our peaceful valley under the trees.
Hello and welcome to the weekly MTG after show for Bloomburrow. Hopefully you've just seen a ton of cool stuff from the upcoming set. We're going to spend the next hour diving into a lot of what you've just seen, including mechanics, the archetypes, Calamity Beasts. We're going to see some promos. We're of course going to look at preview cards, but we're going to dive deep into all of that and talk with some of the minds behind this adorable set. We have with us today in the studio Ian Duke and Oliver too, who are, well, I'll just let you introduce yourselves. What was your part in the set?
Hey everyone, I'm Ian Duke. I was the set design lead for Bloomburrow, which means I was responsible from taking the vision handoff all the way through iterating on the card set itself, sculpting the limited format, and seeing the set through playtesting process.
All right, Oliver.
I'm Oliver. I'm a game designer, part of the play design team. I worked a lot on Bloomburrow during its set design process and worked a lot on the limited and standard applications of the set.
Great. So yeah, these are two of the best people to walk us through this set. So we're going to start going through a bunch of mechanics and preview cards and all of that sort of stuff. If you have questions, go ahead and put them in chat. I'm not going to guarantee we get to them because we've got a lot to get through today. It always helps me if you tag @Magic, and I'll keep an eye out for them and ask what I can. But we're going to launch right into it with one of the coolest new mechanics, Ian. I say coolest, but it's adorable, which is Offspring. And our first preview card, which is pretty powerful here, Warren Warleader. Which is a 4/4 Rabbit Knight with that Offspring ability, and whenever you attack, you either get to make a rabbit or give everything +1/+1. So tell us a bit about this Offspring ability.
Yeah, Offspring is sort of a kicker-like mechanic that appears on creatures, where if you spend a little bit of extra mana, you get an additional copy of that creature, except the copy is a little baby 1/1. And what's super cool about this mechanic, sort of mechanically and gameplay-wise, is that the creatures often self-synergize, meaning if you have the multiple copies of them from using the Offspring mechanic, they kind of combo together in some way. So the Warren Warleader is a great example of this, where with its its ability here can either make tokens or give your team a boost, or you can kind of mix and match the two over the course of a couple turns.
Great. And I noticed something down there. This token's mana cost is 2 white, and I saw a question in chat asking, do the tokens always have a mana value?
They do. They are copies of the creature, so they inherit the mana value that the base creature has.
Okay, and they're all adorable little 1/1s?
Yes.
Do they all come with little tokens like that?
They do. They all have each their individual tokens, so you can kind of collect those as you go.
And I think we've got another Offspring card here with its own adorable little token. Tender Wild Guide. Producer Sean was adamant about us getting this one in the show. It's a little possum, and it's adorable. It's got its little buddy there. Makes mana, can put +1/+1 counters on creatures. All right. Next, let's move on to another mechanic that's really nice. You're just giving people stuff, Oliver. So tell us about Gift and this first card, Kidnap.
Yeah, so Gift is also similar to Kicker, except instead of paying additional mana, you give your opponent, or in multiplayer, you get to choose an opponent to receive the gift. And it's often a card, a food, or a fish token.
The fish token one makes me happy. Gifting a fish, it feels very Bloomburrow.
Yeah, so depending on how powerful the reward is the gift they are giving kind of is related to that.
Okay.
Card is generally like the most costly gift.
Okay, so tell us a little bit about Kidnap here.
Yeah, so Kidnap, it's either, if you don't give the gift, it's kind of a delayed mind control because you can't start attacking with the creature until 3 turns later. But if you do give the gift, you get a full mind control, but it's not card advantage in the same sense mind control generally is because you're giving your opponent a card. But you get a big tempo advantage, so it's still a very powerful play.
All right, we have another gift card here to show, which is a simpler version of the gift mechanic. Wear Down. Is this, what, Oliver, is sort of the balance we see between the different kinds of gifts in the set?
Yeah, so I'd say if you're getting like a full card in reward, generally you're giving a card. If you're getting a more minor reward, then you'll get a fish or a food token.
Okay, so yeah, so like Wear Down here, it's a naturalize effect, but you can destroy 2 if you give a card, like you said. Cool, makes sense. All right, now let's look at Expend. So we've got Wandertail Mentor here. So Ian, tell us a little bit about Expend.
Expend is a mechanic associated with the raccoon creature type, which appears in red and green. And what Expend says is when you spend your 4th mana on casting spells this turn, you get a little bonus. And you can sort of divide that up whichever way you choose. You could cast 1 big spell that costs 4 or more mana, or you could cast, say, 2 spells that cost 2 mana each, and when you cast the second one, you'll get your Expend trigger. And it always appears on permanent cards, typically creatures like this, where you'll get the bonus after you cast spells when this is already on the battlefield.
And I see it specifically calls that Expend 4. Are there different mana costs with Expend in the set?
I sort of glossed over that a little bit. There are a few cards that have different Expend costs, but most of them are 4 at lower rarities. And then there's a couple more exciting ones at high rarities that have, I think, Expend 8 is one of the examples.
Well, I think we saw one of those more exciting ones in the debut. So let's look at Mwera Trash Tactician. So this one, again, has that Expend 4, but it does have Expend 8 as well.
Yep, so you sort of get the basic or the moderate bonus if you spend 4 mana in a turn, but if you can spend all the way up to 8, you get that big, exciting bonus as well.
Makes sense. Now, we haven't paused on this yet, on the treatments, but we showed a lot of the treatments in the debut video, Ian, and then we also have shown a couple here. So let's start talking about these. So this is the borderless raised anime card. Where and how can people pick these up?
So these are available in collector boosters only, and they're all in the foil raised treatment. There are 20 cards in the set that have this treatment, and you can get them in collector boosters of any language. They'll usually be English language, but the Japanese collectors boosters have the Japanese language versions of them as well.
Cool. All right, and we'll talk more about treatments as we go along, but if you have questions about treatments, we will try to answer those, or you can put them in chat. I will pause and say I'm seeing a lot of questions in chat about bands. We're not going to talk about that today. We're here to focus on Bloomburrow, so we'll get to that. Don't worry. Another day, another time. Today we're talking about Bloomburrow. So let's go to the next mechanic, Oliver, which is Forage. So Forage, we've got Thorn Vault Forager here, appropriate name. It's a 2-mana 2/2, mana dork, but it has that Forage. Add 2 mana in any combination of colors. It's also able to search for a squirrel, which is an ability we've all been waiting for a long time. But Oliver, let's focus on Forage. What is Forage?
So Forage is the black-green squirrel mechanic. You basically, to enable it, you have to sacrifice a food or exile 3 cards from your graveyard. So naturally, squirrels are going to be about acquiring food or putting cards in the graveyard. It's fun to combine these two things. Definitely a very black-green feeling ability.
Yep, and we saw a card in the debut as well. So I love Thornveld Forager, but let's bring up Osteomancer Adept here. Oliver, tell us a little bit about this card as well.
Yeah, so this is kind of like a Underworld's Breach for creatures, so it's less repeatable than Underworld's Breach, but it still gives a lot of the same kind of big turns. And I'd say with this one, it's a lot about you want to acquire food to enable it a lot of the time, because naturally if you use cards from your graveyard, you'll have less creatures to bring back. But black, tends to be better at getting cards into the graveyard than acquiring food. So if you're playing like a non-squirrel deck, it's probably going to be more about using cards in your graveyard to enable this.
Okay. In the Showcase Woodland treatment, we've seen a little bit of that so far, Ian. So tell us the story behind that.
So the Showcase Woodland treatment is available in both collector and play boosters, and you can get foil or non-foil versions of the cards. There's 42 different cards in the set. 7 of them are mythics, and the rest are regular rares.
All right. And also of note on the different treatments, we will have a collecting Bloomburrow article going up at the conclusion of the show that will have all the details. So if you're in it for the nitty-gritty, you'll definitely have that resource after the show. All right, now this next card is a returning mechanic, Oliver, we're going to Ian here, which we showed in the debut, which are the enchantment type class. So here we have Hunter's Talent. When it enters, target creature you control deals damage equal to its power, so it's a bite spell in that way. And then the second level is whenever you attack, target attacking creature gets +1/+0 in trample. And then at the beginning of your end step in level 3, if you control a bigger creature, you get to draw a card. So tell us a bit about classes, Ian.
Yeah, so this is returning mechanic, as you said. We first saw it in AFR, Adventures in the Forgotten Realms. And there, these were classes, sort of like D&D character classes. You had Ranger and Paladin and Barbarian and things like that. Here we're going for more sort of like pastoral classes, like jobs that you would see in a village, like a fisherman or a hunter or something along those lines.
Okay. What led you to include classes in this set?
It's just a really flavorful way of sort of showing the way that the animals sort of get together and have their own societies and structures and different jobs.
Okay. All right. Next up, we're going to look at, this is one of the coolest cycles in the set, Oliver. It's a mythic set. There's 5 of these, only 5 of these. But these are the seasons. So let's take a look at Season of Loss. And yeah, the card itself, very cool. You can make players sacrifice creatures, draw cards for creatures that die, and then make people lose life. But the paw print thing is a really cool innovation. So tell us about that.
Yeah, so I like to think of these as like currency cards. You basically get 5 currency, and then depending on how powerful each ability is, it costs an according amount of currency. So naturally, like the 3 is going to be the most powerful, and that's the only one you can't choose multiple times. But there's these are kind of similar to commands from Brothers War. They're just like modal, big effect cards, but unlike commands, you have more customizable ability.
Yeah.
And it's important to note that these are all self-contained. So like as you're resolving this spell, you're spending all these points on the different modes. It's not like a mechanic like energy where you can sort of save this currency over and
Sure.
mix and match them, right?
Yeah, so you couldn't do the 2 twice and just be like, I'm not going to choose it and save
Right,
a
I'll
pauper.
save 1 point for later. No, that doesn't work that way.
No, okay.
Also on this one, the order matters. Like if you choose like 3 1s and a 2, the sack will happen first, and then you draw cards accordingly afterwards.
Now we talk a lot about design knobs when we're talking about this. Seems to have a lot of knobs. How challenging were these to design?
These were really challenging, but we knew early on they were worth it. Just this sort of feeling of you get to mix and match and choose your own combinations, and sort of, you know, these are many cards in one in a sense because they have so much flexibility and so many different ways you can combine. But we did put a lot of effort into making sure that the different modes made sense with each other and combined in interesting ways so that each different combination of modes sort of produced a different series of effects in an interesting way.
Okay, let's look at another season as well. That'll put us up to, I think, 3 seasons for the day. Season of the Bold, so the same, they're all 5 paw prints, right? All the same kind of...
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that is where we ended up. Yeah, we tried mixing different numbers, but 5 is what worked best.
Yeah.
All right, so the single paw print mode on this one is create a tapped treasure token. 2 is exile the top 2 cards of your library until the end of your next turn. You may play them, and 3 is until the end of your next turn. Whenever you cast a spell, Season of the Bold deals 2 damage to up to 1 target creature. So Oliver, tell us a little bit more about this card.
Yeah, so this card is a lot more delayed than the black one, but it enables some really big turns if you just are able to spend your turn 5 just kind of taking off and setting up. But with the extra mana from treasures, extra cards, and the powerful board wipe ability, you could have some really big pop-off turns the following turn.
Now I noticed that this creates tap treasure tokens, which seems to be something you all are doing a little bit more often. Is that intentional shift?
Yeah, very much so. It's just a little bit safer in terms of like the explosivity of having a big combo turn and so forth. In this case, you're getting 5 treasure tokens if you spend all of your points on the first mode. So we didn't want you to be able to get like all of your mana back all at once and then, you know, continue casting a bunch more spells.
You didn't want it to be a ritual that, yeah.
Exactly, yeah. It can be a ritual, but it's sort of at least
delayed,
delayed by 1 turn, right? So you're setting up for your next turn.
Very cool. And there are 5 of these. They're all mythic.
Yep.
Yep. And they all get that really cool art treatment. Actually, let's go back to that real quick so that you can tell us about the borderless treatment.
Yeah, so these are example of the borderless treatment here. There are a few other cards that also have this. They're available in both foil and non-foil from both collector and play boosters.
All right. There it is. Yeah, the art on these is stunning. This set really just... we say this every set, but you know we hit a new level again here. The art is amazing and weird and pastoral and dark and all the kind of things. I don't know. I'm really happy with it. And we're going to see more cool art coming up with. We're going to talk about the archetypes next.
Great.
So next up, we're going to go through all 10 of the archetypes. So Ian, why don't you first tell us kind of about the structure of the set with the different creatures and archetypes?
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, the set has a really strong emphasis on creature types. And to reflect that, each of the 2 color pairs in limited, when you're drafting, will be associated with a particular creature type. So for example, in white-blue, we have birds. In red-black, we have lizards, and so on and so forth. We'll go through all of them. But the important thing to know is if you're drafting and you just choose a bunch of creatures of the same creature type, they will have a mechanical identity, and your deck will come together in a coherent way. Vice versa, if you pick a color pair and you're doing the mechanical thing there, you'll end up with a lot of creatures of the same type. So it kind of feels like it's in lockstep there in a very cool way.
Cool. All right, so let's start things off with bats. This is the white-black crew. Ian, tell us about what bats are up to.
So first off, all the bats have flying, so you'll see that as a common theme among them. And their sort of mechanical theme is caring about yourself gaining and losing life on your own turn. So you've got a lot of cards that are kind of in the space of a Johnny's Pride Mate, rewarding you for gaining life during your own turn. But because they're in both white and black, they also reward you for paying life during your own turn. So if you have, for example, a black card draw spell that costs you some life and gives you some cards, that'll also often trigger some of your triggered abilities from your bats. So this card that we're showing here, the Moonrise Cleric, is just a very simpler enabler for that deck where it just attacks and gains you a life, and then it'll pop off all your triggers as a result.
Okay. Now, we've seen gaining life as an identity for white-black. We've seen losing life as an. How did you land on it being both for bats?
Just a really interesting way of combining both white and black. You know, bats often we think of like vampire bats as like sucking blood, right? So it's like, you know, dealing damage but also gaining life. So it felt both flavorful and also a really unique way of combining the different color pies of white and black together.
Yeah. I also want to go back to that common. I noticed that we're using hybrid mana symbols here. Can you talk a little bit about that more in the set?
Yeah, we do have a cycle of hybrid mana commons, and they're meant to sort of be a little bit of a signpost in terms of teaching you what that archetype is about. But because they're hybrid mana, they can sort of blend into the other archetypes as well. And this is a simple enough one that, you know, any deck might want to use this. For example, like a white-blue deck that's about, you know, birds that also have flying, for example, might want to include this. Just it's a nice card to kind of erase your opponent, gain a little bit of life as you're attacking with an evasive creature.
All right, and we are going to show off all of the hybrid cycle of commons. All right, let's move over to Oliver and talk about rats with Mind Drill Assailant here. So Threshold, we saw in the debut, is returning. Talk a little bit about that and how it works with the rats.
Yeah, so rats are all about thresholds. You just want to put cards in your graveyard. As you see, this one surveils to kind of enable itself. There's also like self-mill and looting. Naturally, blue-black likes that kind of stuff. And I'd say the rats also have kind of like a ninja flair about them. They have a lot of like hard-to-block creatures. They're a lot about nickel and diming your opponents rather than just going for a big swing, although this card is certainly capable of that. As you see, it becomes a 5/5 when you have the thresholds.
Well, I think our next preview talks a little bit more, or shows a little bit more about that nickel and diming here.
Yeah, so this creature helps enable your other thresholds and itself with the looting, and then eventually just starts getting you full card advantage, which is what the rats really want.
All right. Next, let's move on to one that is sure to be a fan favorite, Ian, which is Blue-Red Otters. This might be my favorite creature type in the set. They're adorable, but they're also spell slingers. So tell us about this otter wizard and the otters in general.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, otters were super popular throughout playtesting here. This is the Spellslinger deck that cares about casting instants and sorceries. So you'll see, for example, a lot of the otters have prowess or caring about instants and sorceries in some other way. And there's a couple different ways you can build this deck. You can either sort of be the classic tempo-oriented red-blue deck where you're playing some early creatures with prowess or that care about instants and sorceries, and then following them up by removing your opponent's creatures or putting them off balance with bounce spells or stun spells. So that's one way to do it. The other way to do it is more of a controlling blue-red deck that's focused more on card advantage with a lot of removal spells, and you're trying to prolong the game and then finish your
prowess ones you're talking about. This seems like a powerful little wizard that combines a couple abilities we've not seen in the same place before.
Yeah, absolutely. This is one that, you know, maybe even has some applications for constructed decks as well, just in terms of being able to pop off with a big flurry of spells in one turn and then hit your opponent for a bunch of damage.
All right. Next up, we're going to switch to black-red and some lizards with Cindering Cutthroat, a lizard assassin, which is a heck of a creature type line. But Oliver, tell us what the lizards are up to in this set.
Yeah, they're pretty aggro. They're like a bloodthirst type of archetype, so they're all about getting advantage after you dealt a bit of damage to your opponent. So really good with like pinging effects and small unblockable creatures to enable it.
It seems to me like some of them are built to be, some of the archetypes are built to be a little bit more closely associated. So like we look at the black-white common, which it attacks, it makes them lose, or you gain a life. But their abilities to lose life, the lizards care about losing life. Are there any color pairs that are more intentionally, like more closely tied?
Yeah, one example of that, and we'll see this a little bit later on, is the Sultai color pairs, blue, black, and green, all care about the graveyard in some way. So we saw the squirrel mechanic earlier on was the keyword action forage, where you can exile cards from your graveyard to help pay for costs. On the flip side, rats care about threshold, right? So both those decks want to fill the graveyard. That would be an example. And we did put some effort into making sure that there was blending from one archetype to the next, because we didn't want them to be, totally siloed, like the mice are doing one thing and the birds are doing something completely different, because then sort of the draft would just divide up the cards among who's doing which archetype, and you're not competing for the same resources. So we wanted to make sure there was enough blending that you can kind of go your own path and mix and match the creature types in different ways.
All right, well, let's actually talk about the squirrels next. So black-green squirrels is our next archetype. We have Corpseberry Cultivator, which is a heck of a card name there. At the beginning of combat on your turn, you may forage, and whenever you forage, put a +1/+1 counter on it. Talk about this card.
Yeah, so this is telling you just what the squirrels are about doing, which is foraging here. So you can either fill your graveyard and exile cards from your graveyard, or create food and sacrifice food. And this card rewards you for any of your other cards foraging. So it gives you a way to forage, but also whenever any of your other cards ask you to forage, this will get bigger as well. So really kind of ties together all the different things that are going on with the squirrels. And as you're building this deck, you can either choose to lean into the food theme of it, or you can lean into the graveyard theme of it and be more of like a traditional black-green mid-range deck that's maybe recurring creatures from the graveyard and things along those lines.
All right. And our next card that's sticking with the squirrel archetype is the secret unsung hero of this set, which is Puns. So here is Cash Grab. Ian, tell us a little bit more about Cash Grab here.
Yeah, just a nice little smoothing utility spell to give you some card quality and help fill your graveyard, which you can then use to pay for forge cost and so on.
Now, I do want to stick with this because this set is pretty high in puns. Now, I know you're not in the group that names it, but was that kind of intentional? Did you all have a lot of fun with that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's just so tempting when you're talking about adorable little animals to get in as many puns as you can. And certainly the Vision Design team handed off a bunch of cards with, at the time, playtest names that had puns in the names. A lot of those changed over time, but in the end, the creative team did a great job making sure to capture that fun and flavor.
All right. The next one is not a pun, but let's look at Valley Rotcaller. So one thing I want to note here, and this was highlighted in the debut, is sort of the batching of creatures here. So can you talk a little bit about the squirrels, bats, lizards, and rats?
Yeah, so this is something we refer to as batched creature typal, meaning that we're combining several creature types together. This is something we came up with during set design because we realized we wanted a strong emphasis on the creature types because these are lovable different types of animals that people are going to want to be able to build decks around. But a lot of these creature types are either appearing for the first time in Bloomburrow, or there just aren't very many cards, or there aren't very many strong cards throughout Magic's history that have these creature types. So we realized that if we wanted to care about the creature types in some way, we wanted to broaden things a little bit so that you could maybe combine a couple different types of animals together or play it with your choice of whichever is your favorite creature type within the set. So we have a cycle of rares here in the space of this Valley Rotcaller that are calling out 4 different creature types each, and the way that works is that those are the 4 creature types that appear in black. So the black-white bats, the black-blue squirrels, the black-blue rats, black-green squirrels, and black-red lizards. So those are the 4 creature types that appear on the black example here.
Makes sense. And this card in particular looks pretty powerful for a 2-drop.
Yeah, I mean, Oliver can maybe speak more to that, but there's definitely packs a punch here.
Yeah. Combination of menace and effectively unblockable definitely does a lot. Got to make sure to have 2 blockers for this one.
Yeah. All right. Next up, we'll stick with you, Oliver, and we'll talk about mice, which, arguably the most adorable creature type in this set. They are also pretty aggressive, Oliver.
Yep. Mice are about valiant, which is like a heroic-like mechanic or ability word, but has some key differences from heroic. It also triggers off abilities, so works with equipments and targeted activated abilities on other creatures, but it only works once per turn. So it's more about having a bunch of different valiant creatures and then triggering all those in your turn, rather than the typical heroic gameplay, which is more about just having one heroic creature and then putting a bunch of pump effects onto that one creature.
Okay. And then, so what are the mice trying to do then when you're drafting them?
Yeah, I'd say you want to have a good combination of valiant creatures, and I feel like equipment are the most powerful way to enable these, because you could just pay the equip cost for each of your valiant creatures and trigger all of them in one turn. But also like combat tricks or like bite effects go a long way to enabling these.
All right. Well, let's go back to Ian, and we've already talked a little bit about raccoons, but let's see Junk Blade Bruiser and talk more about raccoons.
Raccoons are in red and green, and they're the biggest of the main supported creature types in Bloomburrow. So we wanted to emphasize that they go a little bit bigger than some of the other creature types by using the expend mechanic that we talked about earlier on. So this is, again, when you spend your expend 4s, when you spend your 4th mana or more on casting spells in a turn, you get a big bonus here. And once again, you can do that either with other spells, and it leads to some pretty interesting strategic gameplay. For example, if I have this out already and I play a 2-drop creature before I attack, you might get a little suspicious. Does that mean I have a two cost instant spell in my hand that I'm going to cast during combat? So you can kind of set things up in that way, or even set up some interesting bluffs where you're sort of threatening the expend happening at instant speed. So pretty neat stuff there.
Now, I do want to call out here, the expend only works on spells, correct?
Correct.
Not abilities?
Yeah, we did at times during set design, we tried it out with working on activated abilities like sacrificing food, for example, but it turned out it was a little bit too easy and a little bit too on board, right? Where you could trick your opponent with sort of like face-up ways to spend a bunch of mana at instant speed. So we ended up going with just the spell mechanic, and it plays a lot better.
All right. Oliver, let's move on to the green-white creature type, which is rabbits, which I know is going to be a favorite of many. So here we've got Head of the Homestead. Look at that adorable little bunny crew there. When Head of the Homestead enters, you create 2 1/1 white rabbit creature tokens, which are going to be those adorable tokens on the right there. So Oliver, tell us about the green-white rabbits.
Yeah, rabbits are naturally about going wide. Just want to make a bunch of rabbit tokens and then play like a mass pump effect to kill your opponent that way.
Yeah, and we saw a